give a big welcome to Rockaway X principal, David Rylski.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. So I'm David, for those that haven't been here yesterday, part of the Rockaway X investment team. And I'm super excited to be joined by great panelists, Lauren from Informal Systems, Pierre from ZK Validator, Matthijs from Maven 11, and Sam from Analog. So we have a great mix of builders and investors today, and we're going to talk about the AppChain thesis. But before we start, can you guys please introduce yourselves and share a few sentences about the firms and the projects that you're involved in?
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to take it first. Hi, everyone. I'm Matthijs, one of the partners at Maven 11. We're a crypto-only venture fund operating out of Amsterdam. We mainly focus on infrastructure investments and DeFi, which I think we'll also touch on in this panel.
Hi, Sam Cassett. I've been in the ecosystem a long time, probably first within Consensus. I was chief strategy officer there, and I helped get that off the ground. I ran a team where we ran a venture studio, and we funded basically all of Ethereum for the first few years, including MetaMask and Fura, some of the stuff that everyone here has probably used. Went on, founded another ZK hardware company, and then I got really excited about the interchain thesis. And so right now I'm working with Jake from Juno and another partner, and we are building a company, a fund called Analog Interchain that invests in this new thesis that is very exciting here.
Hi, I'm Pierre from ZKV. We are a validator that is running on around 20 chains. Roughly half of this is Cosmos chains. We are really focusing on privacy and zero-knowledge proofs. So we organize events and educational contents about these thematics, and also have 2 researchers researching on zero-knowledge. I'm also the founder of AppChain, which is a rollup deployed on Celestia for distributed hardware manufacturing, and the creator of a 3D printer brand, which is actually connected to the AppChain rollup.
My name is Lauren Gallinaro. I work for Informal Systems, specifically on the Hub team. So we are a cooperatively owned software development company. We do most of our work in the Cosmos ecosystem. We're stewards of the Cosmos Hub, comma BFT, and we also have an audit business, so auditing across the interchain stack. We run relayers. We have a validator as well, and yeah.
Thank you. So I'd like to start with the original AppChain thesis. So in the original AppChain thesis, we were supposed to have thousands of different app chains, all with their own sets of validators and all talking together through IBC. Do you think this still holds true, and how has this thesis been evolving over time, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think the thesis sort of at large still holds true. At the same time, I think it hasn't moved as fast as we maybe predicted or hoped. In a large part, that's because I think we underestimated how hard it is to bootstrap your own app chain from like a security budget point of view. So I think if you have like data availability layers who you can outsource that to, that will make it way easier to spin up app chains. And then also indeed IBC or interoperability between these app chains has been quite a challenge. I think we've seen all the bridge exploits, etc. So I think we maybe have underestimated how hard it is to build safe and secure interoperability protocols.
Yeah, so I think it's important to remember sort of the original thesis of this whole thing was, there was Bitcoin, and then if you looked at like CoinMarketCap, there were a bunch of other app chains, but we weren't talking about Cosmos yet. So I think the original idea was, let's make all these chains that might have different properties. Maybe in the future they'll connect together. And I think Cosmos, in some sense, is a very advanced version of that vision. Vitalik came along and said, okay, I think it's way easier if we just make one monolithic stack, and that did, took care of the bottom layers for people. But that also has its drawbacks because you can't get into the stack. So for instance, if I have MEV on an application that I write, I have no way of controlling the settlement and clearing logic of that. I can't get that far into the stack. Or if I wanted to connect directly into the liquidity of another chain, I can't get that far down. Even though I think Evmos yesterday mentioned maybe at the smart contract layer being able to connect to IBC, but that affordability of flexibility is really what's interesting about it, and I think it is starting to come to fruition, and it is starting to decompose the stack, and I'm excited about it.
Sure. I think we're at like an inflection point. We see that with interchain security specifically, right? So I think we need to give it a little bit more time, right? Let it develop. I think I'm looking forward to the next year, I think, where we'll see people test the thesis, not necessarily needing their own validator set, but still being able to enjoy like the flexibility of being able to design their entire protocol, entire chain from the ground up.
So I think most of us agree that things have been developing rather slowly. So what do you think needs to happen to make the original thesis a reality? And
I can go. I would push back on the fact that it's like developing pretty slowly. I think there's two things, right? First, the blockchain space exists in kind of like this like weird panopticon of speculative software development. So like most other domains like don't really have this level of scrutiny with respect to like roadmaps and like product development in general. But I would also say and I guess anyone who was at Gateway last year understands that we were kind of scaling this wave of excitement for Cosmos, and then we hit this bear market. So I wouldn't underestimate the fact that that's like part of it, right? I think it's also a blessing though, because it is nice to be able to build without like the kind of frenetic fanfare of like capital pouring in. So.
Yeah, I think another perspective too is that it depends on what kind of app chain, right? Like if there are some kinds of app chains that sort of, they make sense as a standalone thing that is just decentralized. Like if you look at like NIM, right? Like NIM has to have a bunch of different computers connected together that cause this anonymity set to happen. And that can sort of exist on its own, right? But if you have, say, a DeFi application, and a DeFi application needs liquidity in order for it to be useful, then you need things like IBC to be more like proliferated throughout the market. You need different kinds of infrastructure that connect those chains. You need to allow users to easily flow between those things. If you take a random degen trader person, they want a couple buttons to click to move between these chains, and to the extent that they can do that is going to, that's going to lead to the success of a proliferation of DeFi applications that can be their own app chain. But without that, they're going to get stuck, and they're going to need to write like command line interface things. So I think it depends on what the application is, but I think a lot of them are already starting to look like real reasonable applications that you couldn't do on something like Ethereum.
So coming back to what you said, Sam, like when someone's actually building on, when the developers are building on Cosmos, like how should they choose whether to build on existing layer ones, like I don't know, Agoric or Osmosis, or if they should build spin out their own chain?
Well, I'd like to hear from the builders too, but I can give you a, maybe an investor perspective. I think one is if you need to get into the stack, right? If you have things like MEV that you want to control, if you have things like nodes that need to do something other than just send messages, right? So for instance, in like Somalia, right? Like they need to not only, the validators need to not only be able to execute these strategies, they also need to be able to like connect into other chains potentially and execute those strategies. And there's a three-sided marketplace where other people need to be able to connect and like provide those strategies. So if you need to do something more complex than just only control the application layer within an Ethereum application, I think that's a really obvious marker. I think also if you want to do something that provides an architecturally novel function like Celestia, for instance, right? Like you can't build Celestia on top of Ethereum. It doesn't make sense. It's like, you know, a Ouroboros eating its own tail. So yeah, so something where you want more control, more leeway, and you want to design a decentralized application with a bunch of existing tools that doesn't make sense at a thin app layer.
I think in part it also is a question of who's building it, right? If you have like the experience or the know-how of getting deeper into that stack, it makes sense to maybe start your own app chain. If you're more perhaps focused on front-end, user experience, consumer-facing, which I think we could maybe use as an ecosystem, then it makes sense to just have like a plug-and-play and don't try to bother too much with stuff like MEV, etc.
Yeah, I do agree with all these answers, and I would add to that that the reason why we went to a rollup on Celestia, so basically layer 2, was something which I think is quite interesting and should be explored also, is that we are creating an ecosystem which doesn't need necessarily a native token. So of course, if you don't have a native token, you don't really have a way to incentivize validator sets. But I really would like to see what people would come up with in terms of ecosystem that don't necessarily need a native token.
Yeah, to your point, like that's exactly why Noble is kind of like a perfect like product market fit for consumer chain, right? You can also have your own token as a consumer chain. You have that flexibility, grow your community, see how that goes, right? So yeah, I would say ultimately it's like the flexibility, and it's kind of like being in the candy shop. You really have every option available to you, depending on your needs, right? And I think we'll see a proliferation also of like, tools that we have at our disposal in the next year. I think with like Agoric, Penumbra launching, those will also be like super interesting to be able to leverage.
Thank you.
I just want to add one more thing. Like fundamentally, and this is from an investing perspective, I think, fundamentally, like a layer 1 somehow just has a different mental model that people apply to it, like regardless of what kind of market participant you are. And if you have a permission layer 1, you can build a community around it. You can control token emissions, et cetera. You can grant tokens. So some of that you can do within a normal application layer thing. But there's something about the ethos of that, and there's something about the level of control that you have over that I think it's more prone to momentum, at least in what I've seen.
Lauren, coming back to your previous point, I mean, I fully agree that there's a lot of existing projects being built on Cosmos. We're getting a lot of these incremental tech improvements, but there's still very little traction, very little liquidity. So my question is, like, are we building the tech for the sake of building the tech, or like, what else should we do in order to bring more people into Cosmos?
Well, I don't think this is a Cosmos-specific thing, right? That's, I think, maybe the first fair point to make here. I do agree with your sort of thesis, right? It is a lot of infrastructure, building more infrastructure, which is also why I think tooling around making it as easy as possible for developers who just want to build a consumer-facing application to just deploy that thing without having to worry about token emissions and schedules and building a community around the layer 1 and whatnot. I don't think somebody building something for an end client cares about that too much or should care about that. So we should abstract that away even more. And I think that's what we're currently building in terms of infrastructure. But yeah, I do agree with your view that it is a lot of infrastructure so far. But maybe that just needs to be built before you can get to the application layer more.
Sorry, go ahead.
I want to just like reframe that a little bit and say like, what is Cosmos, right? Because when you say, and obviously I'm coming from Ethereum world, and for a long time that was the only paradigm that I thought in. But when you say like Ethereum, and when you say like versus Cosmos, those are totally two different classes of things. Like Cosmos is more like a way of thinking about and a way of implementing and a tool set. And so like, should we keep building tool sets that are useful and that advance the computer science and the algorithmic and architectural thinking of like how you can build applications in a decentralized way? Like, yeah, I think so. Even if it doesn't directly translate into something like right now.
To me, I see a parallel between because I of course I have a 3D printer background, and so in the 3D printer industry, we really had the same kind of questions, which was, are we developing 3D printers just to make more 3D printers, or are we actually going to use the 3D printers to make actual product at some point? And to me, there are two axes really that, and I agree, it's not specific to Cosmos, it's really specific to all of crypto. Two axes, the first one would be that, of course, we need to increase the UX, the user experience of people interacting with the blockchain. Currently, I think we are still stuck in a state where it's really, really hard to interact with the blockchain if you don't have any technical knowledge about it. It's still way easier to use Google or Facebook as a user. And the second aspect is how do we allow developers to make great products based on cryptocurrency or blockchains. And in my opinion, like for instance, Ignite and the Cosmos SDK are really, really good tools in this direction, but I think they still lack some usability for the developers, namely, for instance, when you need to upgrade the underlying frameworks and all the maintenance and upgrades that you need to make to your node. It's still really, really hard, actually, and we see it as a validator. Chains and Cosmos ecosystem often break for a tremendous amount of various reasons. So yeah, I think this is still something that needs to be increased.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you brought up the 3D printing aspect, 'cause I also started my career in that space, and it's like, yeah, if you look at the tooling even 10 years ago and then now, you know, it's so much easier for consumers to get in and interact with not just the software, but then also like the hardware as well, right? Like it's like leaps and bounds better than where it was. So I think it's still early. I think the way to get there obviously is like improved UX, DevX as well. Part of the way that we also get there is like funding public goods more. I think that's part of the challenge. So.
Simon, you just brought up Ethereum, and I'm actually quite curious. So if we look at Ethereum's roadmap right now, it looks relatively similar to what Cosmos wants to be and the original thesis of Cosmos also. So do you see this as a big risk to the ecosystem?
I actually see it as something that is starting to come into the minds of people within Ethereum world and within the investing world. I actually see it as a strength. So I think, you know, one of the things that's converging is Eigenlayer, which is one of the two, I think, hottest projects in terms of valuation in venture investing during the whole bear market era, is actually the same thing as mesh security, but less good. You know, I think you also have things like, I mentioned before, like Celestia, but I think there's also this idea of decomposing the stack that I mentioned before, but I think that's starting to ramify for people in the Ethereum world. A lot of people in Ethereum don't even know that Celestia has anything to do with the Cosmos SDK. All they know is that it's really interesting that you could decompose data availability from the rest of the stack. And I think people sort of had this light bulb moment where they said, okay, well, the second hottest thing going on in all of Ethereum world is L2s. Those are the biggest market cap things and the best investor, you know, returns. So if you have all these L2s and then you realize L2s don't actually need like necessarily to connect to the same stack anymore, and also the liquidity might, you know, in the next cycle, et cetera, is going to be in these L2s, and it's much cheaper to transact there. There's probably higher transaction volume, and they say, okay, well, why do the L2s actually then need to settle back down to Ethereum anymore? Maybe they don't. Maybe it actually looks like this interconnected mesh of stuff connected with IBC, connected with you know, various other technologies that is actually going to become the fabric of information like message passing and value passing throughout these interconnected chains. Hence, like the thesis of this fund that I'm working on is the interchain, right? Like the idea that this is going to get decomposed, moved around, liquidity will move around more easily in different ways. So I think it's actually inspiring that like Cosmos as an ecosystem has been this like experimentation place, and a lot of the new ideas actually are coming out of here, and then that world is slowly starting to realize it, and you have crossover now.
Yeah, absolutely agree that this is way more than a strength than an issue. Just because like you don't need to have like a single brand of coffee, for instance. If you have many providers for the same thing, it's just going to increase the resilience and different flavors of the same thing that you can have. And this is just increasing the quality of the community, of the crypto community as a whole.
Yeah, it's not zero sum. I think that's like the problem with that thinking, one versus the other. I mean, even from like a product perspective, right? Like you swipe your card at a terminal, you're interacting with like 5 to 7 different providers at that point before you even get to like the database level. So I think that's like what we should be striving for ultimately. And conceivably, yeah, we could be leveraging ideas, technology in both.
Yeah, I would just add that I think what we really need to root for is intercompatibility between things. So maybe it's a little controversial to say this, but I'm still going to say it. I would tend to think that, for instance, if Ethereum was really IBC compatible and stuff like this, it would be part of the ecosystem, of the Cosmos ecosystem.
I was going to say something similar. When I want to like be controversial to my Ethereum friends, I say like, actually Ethereum is like a side chain, like, right? Because once you have IBC all connected into it and everything that it touches and all of its liquidity, then it's this big mesh and it's just one thing. So, I agree.
So let's talk a bit more about the future. Matthijs, what is it that excites you the most as an investor in the ecosystem now? What are the things that you think will be the hotspots in the near future?
Yeah, I think just making it as easy to deploy a app-specific rollup, I would argue, not necessarily chain, as possible. Because then we will have way more experimentation, and just seeing all these ideas being tested out and tried out. I think that's one exciting thing. Another is perhaps a little bit more boring, but the USDC coming into Cosmos ecosystem, so stablecoin, I think that's so much needed. So the work Noble is doing on that end is indeed very exciting. And then together with DYDX, obviously, they don't want to call themselves a Cosmos project, but they are, I think, one of the larger and most used projects out there. So these 3 sort of narratives are definitely interesting for me.
And the MetaMask snap that they mentioned yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. That's also a very good one. And that's also maybe to your previous question, right? Maybe the sort of assets are more zero-sum, but the ecosystem can definitely leverage each other. And I think the MetaMask example is a good one out of that.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I think a lot about what the narratives will be in the next crypto cycle. I think real yield is one of them within DeFi, right? Like people have played the game, and they'll continue to play the game. I think of high token emissions and farming and stuff like this. But we saw if you shoot out all your tokens and people love it, and they only love it for like 3 weeks until that stops, right? And so I think having tokenomics models that are actually based on something that people are really paying for, right? There's actual yield in the normal finance definition of the word yield coming out of applications that people are using. I think that applications that successfully do that will be real. I think you could argue, GMX, for instance, is an example of that, where you're actually getting trading fees, or you're getting the users are paying the stakers to use it. And so I think products like that will be pretty dominant. I think that things that introduce liquidity and allow liquidity to flow more easily. So things like Polymer, things like just IBC getting more out there, things like buttons inside of MetaMask that allow like degens to move easily between chains and they don't even realize what they're doing. They'll go to great lengths to move from Ethereum to Optimism, but they just don't have a button to move over here yet, but they will. And I think I'm bullish on anything that enables that piping and infrastructure, and anything that enables it from a UX perspective in DeFi as well.
I'm really excited about Celestia, for instance, because it brings like a new way to think and architecture software in the blockchain. I'm also really excited about Penumbra. Of course, maybe I have a bias because we are zero knowledge validator, so anything zero knowledge in the space is really interesting for us, and the technology is amazing. I'm also very interested in this whole stablecoin trend, which is going on, because it's going to increase, in my opinion, the user experience. And I'm really excited to see all of this coming together in an integrated, modular, as much as possible, really connected ecosystem that can be used transparently, like for the user in one click, as you said, using many bricks of many technologies.
Yeah, I mean, from maybe like a higher level perspective, I think I'm looking forward to like seeing kind of this proliferation of like products, chains, et cetera, and then kind of this consolidation and like careful thought about like quality over quantity. I think we'll see that play out probably, or for certain, in the atom economic zone. That'll be setting a precedent. And then I'm excited for like privacy as like a first-class citizen. So excited for what comes next this year, what's going to be launching this year.
I really want to echo that, and just from a philosophical point of view, like I didn't get into this whole thing just because it was making money. In 2014, when we were first working on the ideas of consensus, like we didn't know if that would work or not, so I wasn't sure we would make a lot of money. But the difference between this being like a dystopian tool for control and for it being an amazing new financial system is whether we have privacy or not. So bullish on that philosophically.
So nobody has said intent yet. That's also nice, right?
So Sam, a follow-up question specifically to you. As you were a very early supporter of Ethereum, the chief strategy officer at Consensus, and now you're raising a fund that is solely focused on Cosmos. I think everyone is asking the same question, why?
Yeah, well, to be clear, I would say the interchain is the thesis, right? So things that connect to Cosmos, things that are inspired by sort of what I was just describing, that the stack is being decomposed and that liquidity can move more easily. I see, a personal story. I saw that a lot of my smartest friends in Ethereum world were starting to build things with the Cosmos SDK, and I sort of said, well, that's interesting. Maybe they're just playing around. And then, I went to Cosmoverse, Medellin, and I would say, standing in the room, it felt like Ethereum in 2016. All the builders are in the room, and you can talk to the founders, and everyone's excited about building things, even though there's a little bit of drama, I hear. But people are very open, and they want to build things, right? And you don't yet have all the noise, and therefore things can actually move pretty quickly, even though sometimes people lament the speed. It's really fast how quickly developers can move together in an environment like this. And so when I sort of another light bulb moment I mentioned is, when I noticed Celestia, nobody in Ethereum world knows that Celestia has anything to do with this. And what I realized was all these smart people are building here. And the reason they're building here is because of the flexibility and control, and because you can start to build new architectures that are just impossible within the very narrow layer of the stack that you have in Ethereum world, and that whole paradigm is starting to get moved around. When you have more chains, more ideas, maybe like private blockchains, purpose-specific blockchains, and you have the ability to easily, from a UX perspective and from a technical perspective, move liquidity and do secure message passing between them and move state between those applications, you suddenly have this new thing that looks like a mesh instead of a thing that looks like a monolith, and it's just obvious to me. And I want to invest in that transformation that I see happening.
Then this really looks like an internet of blockchains.
Indeed.
So what is your big thesis for the next cycle? Like, which app chains will succeed and why?
Oh, that's a good one.
All of you.
Oh yeah, I have to take it. I think you sort of alluded to this earlier as well. Some real-world assets. So I still remain that finance is the killer use case for blockchains, in my opinion. So DeFi stuff. Again, I mentioned DYDX, but someone also said GMX. These type of products. Financialization of NFTs is also something I believe quite heavily in. So perpetuals on NFTs. These, sort of two things.
Yeah, I would echo again, things that are real application, things that produce DeFi yields that are real, things that echo and either take external real-world financial assets and allow us to tokenize and use them more fluidly and actually build this parallel financial system we've been talking about for years, or things that look like real financial products that are just crypto native. Also think NFTs are going to be huge as well. I know that's a maybe slightly contrarian thing, but I don't think it looks like PFPs. I think some of those will retain value, but I think it also looks like talk to a 13-year-old or talk to a 16-year-old about whether they want to buy digital goods. Like, they definitely do, and we haven't even seen that start yet.
Yeah, fair enough. I would say anything that's facilitating liquidity getting into the system, right? So certainly native USDC, IST also is interesting, and I think facilitating better experience for traders, right? So Penumbra, I think, and other similar solutions are definitely going to be something to watch.
Okay, so last question to all of you. What's your wildest prediction for Cosmos in the next 12 months?
I think there will be more roll apps, so application-specific roll apps than application-specific chains.
You, like controversial? Or wildest, maybe. Like Bitcoin at 100K, right? Like be a game changer for everyone. No, I think, I don't know what this year is going to hold, right? But I think, yeah, I think maybe not wildest, but certainly like my greatest hopes are, more attention, more eyeballs. Also, like better UX, better DevX. Those would be on my wish list for things that people are building out.
I think you will see every major investor in the space scramble to say that they have a thesis about this.
Pierre, do you have anything to add?
I don't know. I would like to see maybe more regulation to have a better framework to understand how we can use all these tools in like the kind of business that we had before all the chains. So I think this is something we would really need. I hope to see it.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure hosting you.
Thank you.
Thanks.